Now, imagine this for a second. A huge global tech company, I mean, a name everyone knows, like Microsoft. And they decide after, more than 20 years to just pack up their direct operations in a country. What happens next? What does that really signal? Not just for Microsoft, but for the whole tech scene in that place. That's exactly the fascinating situation we're diving into today. Microsoft's recent exit from Pakistan. It's definitely more than just a headline. It sparked a lot of talk. Big questions about tech in emerging markets, that whole dance between giant corporations and, local economies. So our mission here is to really unpack the layers behind this move. We want to get past the basic what happened and when. We need to dig into the why, what this means for Pakistan's own tech ambitions, and, what it tells us about the challenges and maybe opportunities for big tech companies looking at similar regions globally.
Right. And to do that, we've pulled together quite a range of sources. We've got reports from places like the Free Press Journal, India Today, The Print. They each have a slightly different angle.
Yeah.
And importantly, we're also looking at an academic study on foreign direct investment, which adds a different kind of layer. Plus, there's a piece really digging into the reasons and what might happen next. So, yeah, it's a pretty full picture we're aiming for.
Okay, great. So let's start with the core fact, the thing nobody disputes. Microsoft has officially shut down its direct operations in Pakistan after, 25 or 26 years? Sources give slightly different numbers, but either way, that's a quarter of a century. Really puts this move in perspective, doesn't it?
It really does. A long time.
Now, let's be clear. This isn't Microsoft just disappearing from Pakistan altogether. They're shifting tactics, moving to a new model. They'll serve customers there through regional offices, authorized resellers. It's actually how they work in a lot of other countries where they don't have a direct local base.
Yeah.
And they've apparently assured everyone that services, contracts, all that stays the same. No drop in quality expected.
That's the official line, yes. And it's a crucial point the sources make this shutdown, in terms of people on the ground, only affects about 5 employees locally. Just 5. And they were mostly focused on sales, selling things like Microsoft Azure, Office. What's really interesting and quite different from, say, India, is that Microsoft never built up a big engineering or development hub in Pakistan. Their footprint was always much smaller, more about liaison and sales.
Okay, understood. So a relatively small direct team to begin with. But still, even if it's presented as a logistical shift, the timing, the symbolism, it's clearly raised a lot of eyebrows. So why now? What's really driving this decision beyond the official statements?
Well, Microsoft's stated reason, the one you see in the reports, points to their bigger global restructuring. I mean, they did just cut around 9,000 jobs worldwide recently. That's nearly 4% of their global workforce. And Pakistan's own Ministry of Information actually connected the exit to that wider strategy, optimization, restructuring, that kind of thing. Plus, it wasn't entirely out of the blue. Sources say they'd already been sort of quietly shifting core functions for Pakistan, like licensing, contract management, over to their European center in Ireland for a few years now.
Okay, so there's the global context. But here's where it gets really interesting, right? Because while Microsoft talks global changes, you hear so many voices inside Pakistan pointing to deeper local issues. This feels like more than just corporate tidying up. It feels like a symptom of something bigger, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And the sources really detail these local challenges, often coming from Pakistani officials, experts on the ground. You've got, first off, the ongoing foreign exchange crisis. That made it really hard for Microsoft to get profits out, to get paid in U.S. dollars because of the state bank's controls on money leaving the country. Big problem for any international company.
Right. Getting paid is pretty fundamental.
Exactly. Then there's the whole political and regulatory instability issue. Frequent policy changes, political uncertainty, just a lack of clear rules for foreign IT companies. It creates a shaky foundation for long-term plans.
Unpredictability. Bad for business.
Very bad. Add to that an economic slowdown, which meant local companies, even government agencies, were cutting back on IT spending. So Microsoft's revenue there was likely taking a hit anyway. And here's a really critical point the sources keep bringing up. Software piracy. Pakistan has one of the highest rates globally. That makes it incredibly difficult to justify a direct presence when so much potential revenue is lost to unauthorized copies. It just becomes economically unfeasible after a point.
Wow. So piracy wasn't just an annoyance. It was a major economic factor in the decision.
It seems that way, yeah, a major factor. And finally, there were challenges with expanding cloud infrastructure. Things like poor internet reliability in some areas, data residency laws, the lack of those huge hyperscale data centers. You put all that together, the currency issues, the instability, the piracy, the infrastructure limits. It paints a picture where Microsoft is refocusing on markets that are frankly, more stable and have higher immediate growth potential. And Pakistan, with its current risk profile, just didn't make the cut for maintaining those direct operations anymore.
That is a lot of converging challenges. It really maps out the kind of hurdles global companies face in these potentially high growth but also volatile markets. Okay, so this leads us to a really interesting debate. It's only 5 employees, a tiny, tiny fraction of Microsoft's global revenue. Is this just a minor operational tweak for them? Or is it, as many in Pakistan seem to feel, a really significant symbolic blow?
That's the core tension, isn't it? From the major blow perspective, the sources are quite clear. Even though the numbers are small, maybe $50 million in revenue, which is like 0.018% for Microsoft, basically nothing, the withdrawal is seen as, quote, more symbolic than numerical. It's described repeatedly as a troubling signal for Pakistan's ability to attract international tech investment. You have Jawad Rehman, who used to lead Microsoft there, calling it more than a corporate exit. He said it's a serious warning about the country's business environment, reflecting a deteriorating environment. He even urged the government towards a KPI-driven roadmap, basically a clear plan with targets.
Strong words from someone on the inside.
Very. And then you had former President Arif Alvi tweeting about it, calling it a troubling sign for our economic future, saying Pakistan is swimming in a whirlpool of uncertainty. Even political groups like PTI Canada weighed in, saying it sends a troubling signal to international investors and reflects deep-rooted governance and policy issues. So a lot of alarm bells ringing on that side.
That's a powerful wave of concern, framing this as a real red flag. But then you mentioned not everyone sees it as, the end of the world. There's another perspective.
There is a kind of counter-narrative, or maybe just a different focus. This strategic shift perspective, you hear it from people like Habibullah Khan, who's a CEO there. He argues that getting caught up in tactical incidents like Microsoft leaving means missing the bigger picture, what he calls strategic events, like Pakistan entering its digital public infrastructure or DPI age.
DPI, so that's things like digital ID, payment systems.
Exactly. Digital identity, payments, data exchange platforms. His point is that Pakistan's digital future doesn't solely depend on having these big multinational corporations physically present. He believes building really strong homegrown DPI is what will actually unlock massive value. He talks about a multi-hundred-billion-dollar digital economy, maybe a 400% jump in e-commerce, huge growth in digital payments. It's a vision focused more on building the foundational layers from within rather than relying solely on attracting the giants.
Interesting. Sort of a build it and they will come, or perhaps build it so you don't need them quite as much perspective. And, speaking of timing, it wasn't just the 25 years. The exact timing of the exit also seemed quite striking.
It really did. Microsoft apparently pulled out just days after the Pakistani government announced this big, ambitious plan to offer IT certifications to 500,000 young people. And Microsoft itself was reportedly involved or at least aligned with that project somehow. So you have this real disconnect. Policy ambition going one way, corporate confidence seemingly going the other.
That's quite a jarring contrast.
It is, and it looks even more stark when you contrast it with what Google seems to be doing there. Sources mention Google is still investing in education, even looking into making Chromebooks locally. So different companies, different strategies, different reads on the situation maybe.
Or maybe different risk tolerances.
Could be. And there's another piece of timing context, a historical one. It's quite revealing. Former President Alvi shared this story. Apparently, after Bill Gates visited Pakistan in 2022, Microsoft seriously considered a major expansion there. But they ended up choosing Vietnam instead.
Vietnam? Why?
According to Alvi, it came down to stability. Vietnam was seen as having greater political and economic stability, especially after, as he put it, a regime change upended those plans in Pakistan. It's a pretty direct statement linking political shifts to lost investment opportunities.
Wow, that anecdote alone speaks volumes, doesn't it? So let's broaden out, connect this specific Microsoft move to the bigger picture. What does it tell us about foreign direct investment, FDI, in Pakistan, or maybe even in emerging markets generally? Is there hard data on how instability affects investment?
There is. And that academic study we looked at provides some pretty stark numbers. It's not just a feeling, it's quantifiable. Looking at data from 1990 to 2020 for Pakistan, the research found a reported 37% decline in FDI inflows for every single unit increase in political instability.
Yeah.
37%. That's huge.
37%. That's a direct, measurable economic cost of instability.
Absolutely. And the study also showed that certain sectors are hit harder. Manufacturing and services, which is where a lot of tech falls, feel the negative impact of political instability more strongly than, say, big capital-intensive projects like energy or infrastructure. And those greenfield investments, building something totally new from scratch, they're the most vulnerable to political uncertainty.
Makes sense. Starting something new requires the most confidence in the future.
Exactly. But there's a slightly hopeful note, too. The study found that governance qualities, specifically things like rule of law, controlling corruption, can actually mitigate some of those negative effects. So strengthening institutions really matters.
Right. It's not just about stability, but about predictable rules and reliable institutions. So this whole situation, it's clearly more than just Microsoft shuffling its deck. It sounds like a real wake-up call, doesn't it? What are the sort of immediate practical ripple effects for Pakistan's tech ecosystem now that Microsoft's direct presence is gone?
The implications listed in the sources are pretty serious. First, there's that hit to global brand trust. Microsoft leaving sends a discouraging signal, especially since other big names like Adobe, PayPal, Stripe haven't set up shop there either. It makes it harder to attract the next wave of investment.
Creates a negative perception loop.
Precisely. Then there's the potential slowdown in digital transformation.
Yeah.
A lot of big projects, both public and private sector, were tied into Microsoft's ecosystem, Azure, Dynamics, Office. Their withdrawal could slow things down or force costly changes.
And what about the talent, the developers?
That's another major concern. Brain drain. You have developers trained specifically on the Microsoft stack. They might now look for opportunities elsewhere, outside Pakistan, or maybe switch to different platforms, which takes time and effort. Ultimately, the feeling conveyed is that Microsoft leaving signals to other potential investors that Pakistan might not be perceived as safe for long-term tech investments right now. It erodes confidence.
It definitely sounds like a cascade of challenges, a really tough spot. So given all that, where does Pakistan go from here? I mean, tech doesn't just stop. What are the practical alternatives people and businesses are looking at, and what does the future look like?
Well, life and tech definitely find a way, as you said. The sources do outline quite a few alternatives that are already being used or explored. For things like Office 365, you've got strong competitors like Google Workspace, Zoho Workplace. For the Azure Cloud Platform, there's AWS, Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud Platform, GCP, Alibaba Cloud. Big global players are available.
So the services are still accessible, just maybe not directly from Microsoft Pakistan?
Right. For Windows OS licenses, people can switch to Linux distributions like Ubuntu or Mint, which are open source, or import licenses from global vendors. For business software like Dynamics CRM, there's Salesforce, Zoho CRM. For communication like Teams, you have Zoom, Slack, Google Meet, plenty of options.
Okay, so there are alternatives across the board.
Yes. And in education, Google for Education is apparently pushing hard. Plus, there's a lot of interest in open source tools like LibreOffice for documents, Moodle for learning platforms, GitLab for development. And while Microsoft isn't doing local developer events anymore, the global resources like Microsoft Learn Online and GitHub, which Microsoft owns, are still fully accessible to developers in Pakistan. That's important.
That is important. So the tools and knowledge are still out there. What about Microsoft itself? Any chance they might return directly?
It's possible, but conditional. Sources suggest a return could happen if Pakistan manages to stabilize its economy and really simplifies those tricky foreign exchange policies. Maybe they'd come back through local partnerships. Another scenario is a hybrid model, third-party vendors selling Microsoft licenses sourced globally, but probably with less local support. And of course, the big one. Microsoft's exit clearly creates an opportunity for its competitors. Google, Amazon, Oracle, maybe Chinese cloud providers. They now have a chance to step in and grow their market share.
Right. So to sum up that part, Microsoft hasn't banned Pakistan or anything. The global services, GitHub, MS Learn, they're still available. It's the direct operations, the local office that's gone. It's a strategic withdrawal, a shift in model, but one with undeniable significant implications.
Exactly. It's being widely framed as, a turning point in the country's digital story. And definitely, as we said, a wake-up call about the urgent need for policy reform, for economic stability, and for building that digital sovereignty from the ground up.
This whole deep dive really highlights just how closely these huge global business decisions are intertwined with a nation's stability, its policies, its whole environment. Some describe Microsoft's departure as potentially just a pause, not the end, for Pakistan's tech future, but that really seems to depend heavily on the actions taken now, today. So maybe the final thought to leave you with is this. How does this story shift your understanding of that delicate, complex balance between global corporate strategy and local economic realities in this incredibly interconnected world we all live in?